Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. Before we move on, I want to remind you to support the show. Pick up the Wrestling Roundtable t-shirt at WrestlingRoundtable.com, and don't forget to shop at our Amazon store as well. Initially, this was announced as who do you want to see come back the most and who do you want to see leave the most, but I thought those questions fit into the larger scheme of the subject of comebacks. So we're going to start with the best this time, and we're going to divide it also into short-term comebacks, if it's a one-off thing like a Royal Rumble appearance or just a run that lasted a few months, and longer-term comebacks as well. So we're going to start off with the short-term. What's a best short-term comeback?
Ricky Steamboat coming back for WrestleMania. That one to me stands out for WrestleMania 25.
Pretty big, yeah.
Who would have thought Jericho has to fight Roddy Piper? Horrible. Then he has to fight Snuka. Horrible. Then all of a sudden, here comes a guy we have not seen wrestle I don't know how many years. And he comes back and he does better than probably 3/4 of the roster even is. And the crowd is going absolutely nuts and loves it. In fact, you were there at that one.
I was there, and
the
atmosphere was absolutely phenomenal. There were people in the crowd chanting, "You still got it," at Steamboat, and he really stole the show up to that point. It was great to see him wrestle. The Hall of Fame the night before was even great too, so I agree with you. Steamboat was great. Rob Van Dam making his Royal Rumble comeback last year in 2009.
Biggest pop of the night.
Biggest pop of the night by far.
Yeah.
Nobody saw it coming. It was great. I wish he would have come back on a full-time basis, at least part-time on the road, because they could have done some really interesting things with him at that point. So I really enjoyed that one.
I really enjoyed Marty Jannetty's comeback in 2005 because he's a personal favorite of mine, and I like seeing him come back and do well. And that run with Kurt Angle building up to the Shawn Michaels match, what a fucking phenomenal match that he had with Kurt Angle on
He
SmackDown.
still could get it, man. Like him coming back 2 years later and dancing circles around Kennedy. WrestleMania 8, the Ultimate Warrior coming back. One of those comebacks that made you lose your voice. I was like, holy shit, the Ultimate Warrior! And then he went and had that great match with Savage and some after. It didn't end too well like most Warrior comebacks don't. But Reinvented Warrior was good.
For a one-night only sort of thing, at One Night Stand 05, how fucking awesome was Mike Awesome against Masato Tanaka? I think it was probably the best match they ever had after having such a long break on top of that.
Yeah.
But also, Rick Martel had a really good run in 1997 when he came back for WCW.
Yeah, he had the TV title a couple times, I think. And yeah, he had great matches with Booker T. That was kind of a shock because Martel got over really quickly. He just came back out of nowhere. Still looked fresh, still looked good.
He was great. He was a very athletic guy. Built himself up in WWF for years as one of their top wrestlers on a consistent basis. Although he never really made the main event, he was still great in the mid-card on a consistent basis. So WCW really got a coup by having him come in.
Two of the more hardcore guys were Mick Foley coming back in 04 and Sabu's resurgence in 06. Because Sabu was coming off a good run in TNA, and then he comes back for the new fake ECW in WWE, and he had some great matches with John Cena. He had a good match with Rey Mysterio. Of course, it ended badly with that terrible ladder match with Van Dam on TV, but it was cool seeing Sabu make a comeback like that. And Mick Foley, wow, what a comeback he had in 04 with the Orton feud. He got himself in shape after WrestleMania 20, which was still a fun match regardless, the handicap match with Rock and Sock against Evolution. And that match with Orton at Backlash 04 was one of the best hardcore matches I think that's ever happened.
The Rock in itself is a great comeback too because it made up for the horrible match he had in 03.
His promos were great in
His
03.
promos on the mic, he was absolutely untouchable.
The matches were garbage.
They were awesome matches, all right.
And-
But Bobby Heenan and Gene Okerlund calling the gimmick battle royal at WrestleMania 17 because hearing their voices again made you feel like a kid. It really was a great nostalgia feeling.
Well, that brings up a question about, does absence make the heart grow fonder? Because the stereotype is wrestling fans don't have a long memory, which I think is complete bullshit. And you always hear about the wrestlers, oh, I got to get back on the road because then I'll lose my spot and they'll forget about me. Bullshit. When people like you, I think they practically like you forever. Look how big it would be if Macho Man came back.
Yeah.
You don't think that would be the big... Look at Bret Hart.
Yeah.
When Bret Hart
Bret
came
Hart.
back, he got a pretty decent-sized pop, even though it's a new generation. But more people our age tuned in for that than have watched wrestling
There
in
was
a
a lot
long
of
time.
criticism with that people wouldn't remember them. And I can't see that. You can watch on demand. There's so many ways to
They have
watch
DVDs.
all DVDs.
There's a lot
There's
more
no
resources for the new generation of
Than we
wrestling
had.
fans than we had.
Yeah.
It's happened before, like when Shawn Michaels came back in 2002, everybody went nuts, everybody loved him. When Ric Flair came back to the WWF in late 2001, everybody loved him too. So I think it
And I
does.
think fans are really interested in the wrestlers now that they could face and how they could interact with the new roster and what the creative team will really do for them.
Well, speaking of Shawn Michaels, he had a long-term comeback, and that's what I want to move on to. Long-term comebacks. What were some of the best?
Hulk Hogan going to WCW. You didn't hear Hogan for a while. Some new generation stars were building, but once he came back and did the whole NWO thing, thing. That's a reinvention, and that's
That's
really
a pretty
good.
long period of time before when he came back and did the NWO, though.
Shawn Michaels also, but Hogan coming to WCW was one.
I think when you mention comebacks, the first name you have to mention is Terry Funk, because he's had several. In 1989, when he came back to feud with Ric Flair after that classic Ricky Steamboat feud, he was already retired the first several times, I'm sure, over. But he had a great run with Ric Flair, and of course he was instrumental in Eastern Championship Wrestling becoming Extreme and becoming prominent in the mid-90s, helping lend his credibility to not just the promotion but specific wrestlers as well. He had a lot of good runs, Terry Funk, so I think he should be mentioned firstly. But of course, Shawn Michaels had a longer main event run now than he did in his original main event run. And as much as I rip on him on the show, he still can go. He still has great matches, so I got to give credit for Shawn Michaels' comeback at that point.
Stone Cold Steve Austin, 1997, when Owen Hart dropped him on his head. A lot of people thought he was done. I saw it live. I was in the building. I thought he was probably done. Seeing how bad a shape he was in, who knew if he was ever going to wrestle again. It ended up being his ultimate demise, but he came back and he was the biggest star.
But
in
if
the
he's
history
on
of the
TV
business.
every week, is it still really considered a comeback?
I think it's a comeback
because
to the
they
ring.
still involved a lot of storylines.
He came back to the ring, and he very well could not have come back to the ring. He could have just rode off into sunset, done something else with his life. He didn't have to come back to the ring.
I think his comeback from neck surgery in late 2000 was a little stronger, at least wrestling-wise, because in the next year of 2001, he was having obviously better in different matches than he did when he was hurt in 98 when he had to change his style. In 2000, and he's tearing it up with The Rock and Kurt Angle, and who we do not speak of, and guys on that level. He was putting on some awesome performances.
Speaking of Steve Austin, the Bret Hart in 96 comeback after the WrestleMania 12 match, he came back, put Stone Cold on the map. With the great matches they had, the characters, the way they drove each other to go in opposite directions, adding Michaels to the mix, McMahon to the mix, probably one of the best Bret Harts that WWF has seen.
Some of the fans of international wrestling, Japanese wrestling specifically, might mention Kenta Kobashi's comeback from cancer, Jushin Liger's comeback from a brain tumor, Great Muta's comeback from knee surgery, resurgence of his career. I think in 2002, how many comebacks were there in 2002 between Eddie Guerrero having an amazing run with Rob Van Dam coming back from his rehab and getting juiced up for his WWF return, Hulk Hogan making his huge comeback. Hulk Hogan had a great run for that few-month time span. Obviously, Shawn Michaels, we've mentioned. Rey Mysterio Jr. had a big break between WCW ending. He did a couple shots in Mexico and indie promotions, but then he came back, had an awesome match with Chavo on SmackDown, and he's had a good run ever since.
The Rock?
The Rock came back in 2002, again having amazing matches, putting Brock over at SummerSlam in one of the best matches I've ever seen. And last but not least is Goldust. Surprise return at the Royal Rumble, and then moved on into the Booker Goldust stuff later in the year, which was pretty good. But before we move on to some of the worst comebacks, one last question. Who do you want to see come back the most?
Macho Man Randy Savage.
course.
Bring him back. He needs to come back. I mean, everybody will go nuts when he comes down that aisle. If they even do like a short-term program like they're doing with Bret Hart, that would be fantastic. And especially put him in the Hall of Fame. He absolutely deserves it. Macho Man Randy Savage, by far.
The Warrior, just to have his presence on WWE television just one more time would be really satisfying. Do it for your fans, and you don't even do that, then you don't care.
It would really cap it off if they gave him a live mic.
I'm gonna go with that. Savage. That's one guy who, when you watch beginning years of Raw, Macho Man is always gonna be, in my mind, associated with that broadcasting. I just love to have Raw open up and I just want one ooh yeah. Macho Man was always one of my favorite guys, one of my favorite characters.
He added a lot to those matches on Raw too, because he was a former world champion.
Yeah.
He had a good analysis on it. I'll never forget
That feud with Crush he had.
Yeah, Bret Hart and 1, 2, 3 Kid had a great match on Raw, and he had great analysis on that. Stood up and started clapping it because it was a fantastic match, and that was I guarantee
I
he
thought it was
wasn't told to stand
a
up.
great announcer.
Needless to say, if Pomp and Circumstances started blasting over the live speaker, we would all have a collective heart attack. But I think my picks would go against the stereotype whenever I mention Daniel Bryanson or Ricky Steamboat and all the technical wrestlers that I like Kurt Angle. People say I'm a smart mark and stupid shit like that. Really, would a smart mark want to see Sid come back? Every Royal Rumble, I'm waiting for Sid to come out and destroy people. I want to see New Jack come back and start fucking people up old school with weapons and shit. I want to see Ming come back, salt and pepper and all, and start tongue and death ripping people. I wanted to see Stevie Ray come back just once in tag team again with Harlem Heat, Booker T. I want to see Monty Brown come back and start pouncing people. I'm shocked that Dean Malenko why hasn't he come back at least once? I remember there was a rumor around WrestleMania 20 with that stupid gauntlet match that he might show up for it. He seems like a guy who might keep himself in decent shape.
Yeah, it looks like it.
He was a great wrestler. I'd like to see him come back at least once. But everyone has made the joke about Brutus Beefcake coming in because of Hogan and winning the X Division belt.
I hope so.
I hope so.
I hope he wins that. I hope he wins the titles. I hope he wins tag titles. Everything.
Global Championship.
And because he's pissed off about McMahon owning the rights to Brutus the Barber Beefcake, I think he should come back as the Cake.
The Cake?
Just the Cake.
What about the Booty Man? I want to see the Booty Man.
The Cake.
Zodiac? No
The
Zodiac?
Cake is the greatest wrestling name ever. The Cake. That's right, Brother Cake's going to come back. The Cake. Well, we're going to move on to some of the worst comebacks when we come back.
The Cake.
The Cake.
The Cake.
How great would that be if there was a wrestler called The Cake?
It would be funny. What would he be? What would
Eat
his
me,
name
I'm
be?
the king.
He's just Brutus Beefcake. That's
Would he
it.
come out in icing or?
No, that's just the name.
Just the guy. He comes out.
Just the name.
Nothing to do with Cake.
Absolutely not.
Who's playing?
USA Canada.
What period?
Right?
It's a flag match?
It's over. Holy
Yeah.
shit.
One of my friends from Canada was talking shit, and I was like, I
Imagine
think
pro
the
wrestling
US
people
might
look
win.
at
He
sports.
was like, and if I lose, I'm gonna be so
Good.
pissed.
Go judge a performance.
I'm rolling.
4 stars.
Nice high kick. Oh, and he's out.
That's it. What's keeping him out?
Watch all of your favorite fighting events live on GoFightLive.tv.
Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. Thank you for joining us on YouTube, iTunes, or Go Fight Live. Wherever you're watching us, make sure to subscribe and rate the video and tell your friends to do the same. So moving on to worst comebacks, much like the best, we're going to segment it into worst short term, again, a one night only or maybe a short run sort of thing, longer term, and then who do you want to see leave the most. So starting off, what were some of the worst short term comebacks, Derek?
The 1996 Survivor Series when Jimmy Superfly Snuka turned out to be the mystery partner. After all the hype, it seemed like the Macho Man was coming back, but it turned out to be the Superfly.
No, didn't work
My
out.
heart sank.
Speaking of Macho Man, everyone who says they want the Macho Man to come back should be wary based on the comeback he had in TNA in 2004.
Ooh.
Oh, that was so
He
bad.
can hardly kneel down to cover Jeff Jarrett.
That was bad. I'd rather see him in Spider-Man. Vader in 05. What a fat mess. There wasn't like...
I'm a fat piece of shit.
Compared to his great debut in 96 when he came out, Vader time. On paper, him and Batista looks like it'd be interesting.
If
but,
you had a time machine.
Yeah, but he came back falling all over the place, could barely stand. How he even fit in his tights, I still don't know. Vader, no, sorry.
I think you're going to see a lot of these names are events where the guy is obviously past their prime. They shouldn't be doing this anymore. Like Dick Murdoch. When they brought him back in the Royal Rumble 95, it's not like when they brought Bob Backlund back in 94, which I thought they did a great job with. When they showed the hype videos, let us know who he was, let us know his history. They just threw Dick Murdoch out there. The last time he was in WWF was 1984, so we had no idea who the fuck he was. He looked terrible. But speaking of Klansmen, Terry Gordy's comeback in 96 was pretty bad. Terry Gordy had a reputation of being a big man who could move, very talented, huge potential. And then he came back from a brain dead incident or something like that, and they put him in the executioner outfit. It was really sad to see him in that state.
Legion of Doom in 2003. They made a one-time appearance on Raw wrestling Rob Van Dam and Kane. And that's just not what you want to remember the Legion of Doom for doing. To be the last time those two were on TV together in the WWF, it's just left a sour taste in your mouth. It's something that you did not want to see. They didn't perform good. They couldn't bump anymore. Hawk was no selling. I just really didn't like seeing it.
Going along with that, how about Road Warrior Animal as the mystery man in WCW?
Oh, what a letdown. Well, if you got a brother working for your company, you're always going to get a spot. And the year before, when they brought back the Varsity Club, Rick Steiner, Kevin Sullivan, Mike Rotundo, like, why?
Yeah.
Was it really that big in '89? Kevin Sullivan just needs to get himself out there, I guess.
And being that you brought up having the brother, Road Warrior Animals come back with Heidenreich in, I think it was 05.
Oh, yeah.
Scott Hall in 2002 with the WWF, because he was here and gone before you know
Right.
it. He was out
NWO
there.
in general in 2002. They debuted backstage.
On Heat.
On
Yeah,
Heat.
Heat, yeah.
They started off on
Unbelievable.
Heat, and then the whole thing with Austin, it was just a big
It
mess.
was a mess, yeah.
Public Enemy's supposed comeback in ECW 99 after they got thrown out of every one of the other big two and they weren't welcome and they were exposed for, as well as Heyman covered them up in their initial run. They didn't exactly have a lot of memorable matches on TV either. And ECW was looking at like, what the fuck are you guys doing here? You have nowhere else to go? Get out of here. It was pretty sad. But so was Mick Foley's 2-week retirement in 2000.
Ugh.
He said, I'm not going to do what everybody else does. And all of a sudden he's there for WrestleMania 2000 in terrible shape. Did bad. Ugh.
And it's 2010, and he's still wrestling today.
Unbelievable.
Well, that brings a question up. Can you have too many comebacks?
Absolutely.
Is there a limit? Because if you
Absolutely.
go by Foley, it looks like it, but if you go by Undertaker,
It depends also how it's done, too.
Right.
If it's injury, obviously they have no choice. If it looks forced, then it's not good.
well, then what makes up a good comeback?
You
That's
have to care about the person the first time around. The difference between, like you said, like a Vader comeback in 2005, that was way past the time anybody cared about Vader. But a guy like Hulk Hogan coming back in 2002, people didn't want to see him in the black and white. The people made the decision as soon as he walked through the curtain. You have to care about the individual
build-
the first
build it
time
up.
around in order to have the comeback mean something. What if Duke the Dumpster Josie came back?
He could come back as here's Duke
It's
the
kinda
Dumpster.
like-
If they built up videos of Duke the Dumpster Josie, I guarantee he'd
He'd
get
get
a
a
decent
pop.
It's
Huh.
kind
pop.
of like you
He
spoke
get-
about.
yeah.
Nobody cared all that much about Val Venus in 1999, so bringing him to TNA in 2010 is another name to throw on a show to say, oh, we could add him to Hogan, Flair, Hardy, Val Venus.
If Duke Josie came back in TNA 2010, he'd be world champion. But going on to the worst long-term comebacks, what were some of those?
Cena 08 lost to Orton, he lost to WrestleMania, he lost.
In other words, no
lost.
fault of his own.
Yeah, it wasn't his fault, but he just got put in bad situations. He went that whole year, strong champion, beating everybody, to the complete opposite in 08.
Sting finally coming down from the rafters in 97 against Hogan at Starrcade. Nick Patrick totally killed
He did.
any momentum he could have possibly had.
They really fucked up that comeback.
They fucked it up.
bad. And then it didn't get any better in '98 because
Oh, the
after
Red and
being
Black.
after being in the rafters for a year and a half, being angsty and not talking, all of a sudden he's trying to be hip and he's red and
Right.
with Luger. I didn't buy it for a second.
Matt Hardy, when he came back after the whole Edge and Lita angle. What has he done of
What?
relevance that anybody cares about since he's come back?
Absolutely
He
not.
hasn't done
Nothing.
anything.
That was
This is
it.
a guy that people thought might have been a main event quality guy. He's a mid-carder for life. No question about it. Now he's dancing with the Great Khali every week on SmackDown.
I don't think that's
It's-
any fault of his own either. I think they dropped the ball huge on that
They
edge.
did
that
on the
Hardy
angle.
feud.
They completely dropped the ball on that angle, but he hasn't done anything, and they haven't done anything with him. His best bet would be future endeavored right now.
For the first 7 months or so of 2002, Triple H was pretty intolerable. What I don't understand about his big comeback in MSG is they always use this word to describe it: triumphant.
It was just the biggest pop that we've seen in a long
Fine,
time. at
biggest
that
pop
point.
of his
That's
career.
it.
Let it be that. It's not like he beat anybody.
Yeah.
He came back 60 pounds heavier from all the rehab he was doing, and he posed there. And really, as a babyface, didn't work.
That was automatic just based on the amount of time he'd been off.
Yeah, he missed
Yeah.
the entire
It's
invasion.
kind of like Edge now because of the length of time off and the amount of respect that the fans had for him.
You're going to be hard-pressed to find a worse run that didn't live up to anywhere near the hype as Goldberg in 2003.
I will agree with 100% on that.
Barely anything memorable. The only good match I think he had was with Jericho at Bad Blood that year, and everything else was garbage.
He had some good comedy segments, if I remember.
But he
had
wasn't
had a
made
good-
for comedy.
He wasn't Goldberg. He wasn't the Goldberg that we remember.
And how
know
can
why?
you fuck that up? After the invasion, after NWO, the one guy, we were waiting for two people, Sting and Goldberg. And when they finally showed promos for Goldberg, I was like, holy shit. And then after that, I think The Rock ruined him too.
I think in some cases, and the two I'm going to mention are guys who are dead now, so it might be right. There's guys that just don't know when to stop. And when you get someone like the British Bulldog, when you look at his comeback in WCW in '98 after injury, pretty sad. Come back the next year in
99,
WWF in '99,
even worse.
even
Awful.
worse. And
Atrocious.
look where he is now. And along those lines, when you see how good Brian Pillman was in the early 90s, Flying Brian was an appropriate nickname. And then when he's going through so many accidents, and you know, at least posthumously, that he's in such pain in every match, it was really sad to see the state Brian Pillman ended up in 97.
For the short amount of time that he was in WWE, he made an impact. It was he who stirred all the shit between Austin and Brett.
Fine enough, but that's talking. I'm talking about in the ring. It was really sad to see how Brian Pillman had degenerated over the years with all the injuries
Yeah, I
and
think
drugs.
his
Well,
highlight
yeah,
was
the-
Canadian Stampede.
It was a tragic ending, but I love Brian Pillman's story.
I like
about
Brian
how he-
Pillman too. I'm
That's
just
the
saying.
story. If I
he made-
understand, he's talking about,
Yeah,
in the ring. It
in-ring
wasn't
comeback.
flying
I agree,
Brian
I agree
Pillman.
there.
Last question. Who do you want to see go away the most?
Ric Flair. Get out of here. Leave already. You got the best send off
think he
in
can
wrestling
afford it?
history. No, he definitely can. Definitely can. He's had the best send off in wrestling history at WrestleMania 24, and he screwed it all up. He's coming back to wrestle in TNA. I hate to plug it, but he is. And that's pathetic. I can't stand it. Especially the Hulkamania tour, too. Came back and wrestled Hogan. It's pathetic. It's horrible. Go away.
If Jeff Jarrett
Oh,
could
thank
take
God.
the Dudley Boys with him,
Kennedy, Anderson,
And I was just
whatever you want to say.
I was just getting used to not having him in my life.
Yeah, exactly. I really want to see TNA succeed, but not with him.
Mm.
They can really do without him.
I'm not going to jump on the obvious bandwagon of the Triple H's and Undertakers and Shawn Michaels. Guy I may not personally like. I always complain, why are they fighting each other?
But they still put on some good matches.
Not only do they put on good matches, I'd prefer them doing it not against each other. I'd like to see them mix it up with some of the younger guys, as I've mentioned on the show before. So I don't necessarily think they should go away. I think they should just be in different roles.
I think they should pass the torch. That's
Exactly.
Yeah.
But someone, I don't understand why he's even in wrestling anymore. Obviously, it's the money, whatever, fine. But Batista, what's he got left to do? He's about 40 years old, in the million-time world champion already, whatever. Big name, fine. I'm sure he's made a ton of money. Can he do movies? for
Have you
this
heard his
character?
promos? You think he could act?
He could be a mute. And I'm sure some people want us to be mutes, but that's not what the idea of the show is. We're going to talk and give our opinions. And that's it for this week of the Wrestling Roundtable. Join us next month. We're going to talk about some fantasy booking. We're going to pick 2 wrestlers from the top promotions and build our promotion around that. We're also going to talk about some of the more topical events and goings on in wrestling, of course. As always, join us on WrestlingRoundtable.com. So for the panel, Will Valfides, Jason Oleto, Derek Short, Rodney LeConte, I'm Eric Santamaria. Thank you and join us next month.